Making headlines for this week of July the 1st. Brexit bluff. Fear-mongering meaningless as markets return to some degree of normal. The EU lie. From economic cooperation to political superstate, the EU was planned all along to enslave. East versus West. Different financial strategies offer hints as to why West is collapsing at this time. And Juncker talks ETs. Huge comments made in EU Parliament suggest EU politicians are more than aware of galactic presence on Earth.
With news around, upon, within, and beyond our planet, the program making disclosure official. This is Cosmic Vision News. Here is Jeffrey West.
Greetings and blessings to all. Global events and changes seem to have rather suddenly shifted into overdrive, although those who have been observing the events for at least the last year may not be as surprised to see what is now unfolding. There are many questions, and even if one thinks that one has the answers, those answers will no doubt only lead to more questions. Let's start this week by looking at the financial consequences that have come as a result of the Brexit vote. Perhaps to no surprise, the stock markets have again stabilized after only a few days of chaos. Those who are well connected within the financial world and well connected to the global cabal probably made their millions, if not more, on a false scare that a Brexit was going to cause some earth-shattering cataclysmic effect. The world is continuing to move forward, and the people are continuing to awaken, and they are becoming more informed and more empowered to putting a stop to what is going on around Europe. The London Guardian reported on June 24th that, allegedly, as a result of the Brexit vote, over $2 trillion was wiped off the world markets. Markets crashed. Some cabal members very likely got a lot more money betting on the crash, yet less than a week after, the markets have pretty much recovered. Despite leaders and business pundits pushing their fear-mongered agenda, it seems that the world continues to move forward, and it should not be much of a surprise. We're starting to see how the fear-mongering works against the general public, who are mostly uninformed and unaware about what is really going on, and they are too worried about their day-to-day lives and survival to really care too much about it. Ambrose Evans Pritchard, in a Telegraph article from June 29th, acknowledges that the UK faces a serious constitutional crisis, but wrote that what we do not yet face is a global financial crisis or a Lehman moment, referring to 2008. The world's central banks were ready for Brexit and have acted in unison. Jerome Schneider from PIMCO says that there have been none of the telltale signs of systemic seizure. Rates on commercial paper have hardly moved. The LIBOR-OIS spread, which is traditionally a stress gauge, has been well behaved. So have collateralized funding markets. It seems that those in power were very well prepared for the possibility of a Brexit vote, and therefore they must have also known that the risk of such an outcome was highly unlikely, if not planned, if so much planning and effort was put into this preparation. Governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, commented on this the day after the Brexit vote.
The people of the United Kingdom have voted to leave the European Union. Inevitably, there'll be a period of uncertainty and adjustment following this result, but as the Prime Minister said just this morning, there'll be no initial change in the way our people can travel, in the way our goods can move, or the way our services can be sold. And it will take some time for the United Kingdom to establish new relationships with Europe and the rest of the world. So some market and economic volatility can be expected as this process unfolds. But we are well prepared for this. Her Majesty's Treasury and the Bank of England have engaged in extensive contingency planning, and the Chancellor and I have remained in close contact, including through the night and this morning. To be clear, the Bank of England will not hesitate to take additional measures as required as markets adjust and as the UK economy moves forward.
History has shown time after time that the world doesn't change overnight just because of a vote on a topic. Assuming Carney was truthful in saying that we were well prepared. This would suggest that there were more people involved in the financial market events than is being revealed to the general public, and that these events were not tied merely to Brexit. Pritchard also noted that it was a dead certainty that the ratings agencies would strip Britain of its AAA status. Standard & Poor's told this newspaper before the vote exactly what it planned to do. In other words, a fear-mongered statement of potential punishment. The major cabal-controlled ratings agencies followed through on their threats to punish the British people for their brazen nerve to challenge their dominion. The BBC reported on June 27th that S&P, Fitch, and Moody's all lowered their credit ratings of England in the wake of the vote, this despite the fact that the markets have recovered. What will likely happen in the very near future is that the credit rating will be quietly restored after the fear-mongering has served its purpose or failed. This is not the first time Britain has had a credit downgrade. The Daily Mail reported that the country's credit rating was downgraded also in 2013, and yet it was restored again to its AAA status shortly after that. Remember that the Western ratings agencies do not base their ratings on sound economics, but rather on the message or agenda that is being imposed upon a country and its people for the purposes of achieving a predetermined specific goal within that country. This is why the BRICS countries, meaning Russia and China for now, have launched the Universal Credit Rating Group in 2013 that is claimed to offer a fairer system for rating countries and their economies. According to dagongcredit.com, UCRG, the Universal Credit Rating Group, has been established by 3 founding members, namely China-based Dagong Global Credit Rating Company Limited, the U.S.'s Egan-Jones Ratings Company, and Russia's Rus Rating JSC, and its formation is considered a first important milestone in the reform to the international credit rating regime. Pritchard continues, what we have learned from the market moves since Brexit is that Europe is just as vulnerable as Britain. The vote has already triggered a banking crisis in Italy where the government is struggling to put together a €40 billion rescue, but is paralyzed by the constraints of Euro membership. The Eurozone authorities never sorted out the structural failings of the European Monetary Union. There is still no fiscal union or banking union worth the name. The north-south chasm remains, worsened by a deflationary bias. Yet, it should be dawning on European politicians by now that the economic fates of the UK and the Eurozone are entwined, that if we go over a cliff, so do they, and just as hard, and therefore that their bargaining position is not as strong as they think. They cannot dictate terms. Pritchard himself does not seem to have the full awareness of what is going on either. Very few do, including myself. He seems to feel that British and European politicians fail to understand what is coming at them from Asia. I personally am not yet convinced that this is true. Given the fractures that appear to be forming within NATO-aligned countries, it seems that countries are becoming very aware of a new economic paradigm coming out of the East, with currencies backed by gold and a new and extensive Silk Road trading alliance that eventually seeks to run from the Atlantic east through Europe and Asia to the Pacific. Perhaps it is no coincidence that Iceland is suddenly making more of an appearance on the global stage. As I say this, most people will probably think of Iceland's stunning and surprising success in defeating both Italy and England in the Euro Cup football. However, Iceland is making a few other headlines at this time that are perhaps given a little bit less attention, but it is still attention. The Iceland Monitor website reported on comments made by the current president of the country, who will be leaving his position shortly following the recent election of a new president for the country. And to the surprise of Western media and pundits, this new president is a president with no background in politics. The Icelandic people continue to demonstrate to the world that they are willing to think and act outside the box of the currently established paradigm in order to try to create a different result from what they have always received in the past. The article writes that the outcome of the EU referendum in the United Kingdom is good news for Icelanders and presents an opportunity for Iceland and other countries in the North Atlantic, according to the country's outgoing president, Ólafur Ragnar Grímsson. First and foremost, the outcome is the most serious setback the leadership of the European Union has seen for a long time, Grímsson said, and a verdict so grim that it is hard to find words to describe this historic event. First of all, it is now obvious that here in the North Atlantic there will be a triangle of nations that all stand outside the European Union: Greenland, Iceland, Great Britain, the Faroe Islands, and Norway, says Grímsson. This key area in the north will be outside of the influence of the European Union. On top of arresting bankers and politicians, electing Pirate Party members to Parliament while moving that party into a possible leadership position, and taking steps to crowdsource its constitution, Iceland is also noted for having declared a boycott on all Israeli goods in September of 2015. The London Express, in an article by Laura Mowat on June 25th, notes Russian politicians as celebrating the Brexit vote. She writes that Russian nationalist leader Vladimir Zhirinovsky said, "Rural, provincial, working-class Britain has said no to the Union, which was created by the financial mafia and globalists." The leader said the EU would disintegrate, and in 5 years' time it would be a forgotten term. The outspoken leader called the decision of the British people a great act of bravery. President Putin has vowed to monitor the situation carefully as the formal procedures associated with the vote follow. The Russian Finance Ministry has said Brexit does not bear any serious risk for the Russian economy. With the UK now planning to leave, it may become harder for Europe to enforce its US-demanded sanctions upon Russia, and this may help to accelerate a growing trade and economic partnership with Russia, which will further erode and shut down US hegemonic control around the continent. In geopolitical news, looking more now to the political fallout after the Brexit vote, although we are not very likely to get a wholly accurate picture of what is going on until sometime down the road, perhaps after the EU has collapsed in its current form and the global cabal has been fully neutralized, it may be possible to start seeing some hints as to what the plan is going to be for Europe while still under the control of criminal bankers and unelected officials. CVN had reported that the EU was holding off on making any specific announcements about the future direction of the EU because there was apparently some fear that if the British people found out what was being planned, they would vote to leave. As it turns out, they voted to leave anyway, so it seems the EU is moving forward with some kind of a plan. Australia's news.com website reported on June 30th that the EU has unveiled plans to morph the continent's countries into one giant superstate just days after Britain voted to leave the EU, it is claimed. Foreign ministers from France and Germany presented the radical proposals to do away with individual member states' armies, criminal law systems, and central banks, The Sun reports. The blueprint suggests the 27 states in the bloc would also lose what is left of their powers to control their own borders, including the procedure for admitting and relocating refugees, according to reports by Polish media. The article continues, the plans have been branded an ultimatum designed to create a European superstate dominated by large nations by Polish state broadcaster TVP. Poland's foreign minister Witold Waszakowski said this is not a good solution, of course, because from the time the EU was invented, a lot has changed. The mood in European societies is different. Europe and our voters do not want to give the Union over into the hands of technocrats. Poland had always been an ally of the UK's when it came to fighting creeping federalism in the EU. The article suggests that the people of the UK dodged a superstate bullet by getting out before the power brokers attempted the next rounds of stealing people's freedoms and exchanging it for more commercial, corporate, and undemocratic controls. The geopolitics.co website wrote the following on June 25th. EU leaders cannot hide their panic as they confront the prevailing reality that Europeans are now questioning the validity of a centralized Europe that is far from what was being advertised prior to its birth. Just a few days ago, we were deeply concerned that the Brexit campaign would lose after the false flag murder of Labour MP Joe Cox. It was very astounding how the majority of the British people were able to figure out the fact that it's too absurd to kill someone from the other side when your position is winning in all the surveys, independent or otherwise. The only conclusion we can draw from the historic results would be that those who voted for Brexit were doing it for the sake of principle and to protest the dictatorial behavior of those unelected personalities holed up in Brussels. Principled protest vote, of course, cannot be intimidated and subdued. They grew more emboldened as the opposition began to use dirty tactics and covert maneuvers. The outspoken and unofficial spokesperson of the Brexit campaign, UK Independence Party leader Nigel Farage, gave a YouTube interview with Chris Walter in May before the referendum. Farage tells Walter that the clear intent of keeping the UK in the EU is power. He states that the EU started as a peace-oriented project, but it has now devolved into a power project. Farage quoted Manuel Barroso, the European Commission president, as saying that we are building the first non-imperial empire. After the vote, and then standing up at the European Parliament in Brussels, Farage had this to say.
Isn't it funny? You know, when I came here 17 years ago, and I said that I wanted to lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union, you all laughed at me. Well, I have to say, you're not laughing now, are you? And the reason you're so upset, the reason you're so angry, has been perfectly clear from all the angry exchanges this morning. You, as a political project, are in denial. You're in denial that your currency is failing. You're in denial. Well, just look at the Mediterranean. No. As a policy to impose poverty on Greece and the rest of the Mediterranean, you've done very well. And you're in denial over Mrs. Merkel's call last year for as many people as possible to cross the Mediterranean into the European Union has led to massive divisions between countries and within countries. But the biggest problem you've got, and the main reason the United Kingdom voted the way that it did, is you have, by stealth, by deception, without ever telling the truth to the British or the rest of the peoples of Europe, you have imposed upon them a political union. And when the people in 2005 in the Netherlands and France voted against that political union, when they rejected the Constitution, you simply ignored them and brought the Lisbon Treaty in through the back door. What happened last Thursday was a remarkable result. It was indeed a seismic result, not just for British politics, for European politics, but perhaps even for global politics too, because what the little people did, what the ordinary people did, what the people who have been oppressed over the last few years and seen their living standards go down, they rejected the multinationals, they rejected the merchant banks, they rejected big politics, and they said, actually, we want our country back. We want our fishing waters back. We want our borders back. We want to be an independent, self-governing, normal nation. And that is what we have done, and that is what must happen. And in doing so, we now offer a beacon of hope to Democrats across the rest of the European continent. I'll make one prediction this morning. The United Kingdom will not be the last member state to leave the European Union. The question is, what do we do next? Now, it is up to the British government to invoke Article 50, and I have to say that I don't think we should spend too long in doing it. I totally agree, Mr Juncker, that the British people have voted. We need to make sure that it happens. But what I would like to see is a grown-up and sensible attitude to how we negotiate a different relationship.
EU Commission President Juncker then fired a bit of his own back at Farage by saying, "You've been wanting this result, and now you have it. Why are you even here?" Meaning, why did he even show up at the EU Parliament? Despite all this, one can be sure that there is much more going on behind the scenes, so I remind listeners again to not accept everything I share as truth, because there is so much information coming out right now that it is impossible for one person to stay on top of, let alone interpret for the highest good of all. It is up to each listener to interpret and use what is offered for his or her highest good, and hopefully one will choose to use that info in greater service to humanity and the planet. The Breitbart.com news website wrote it this way: "The Brexit vote was Britain's Independence Day. June 23rd will be the day that the British people filed their papers to divorce a global bureaucracy that buried national sovereignty in bureaucratic red tape. After constant failures that left many Brits without jobs and living in a nation being colonized by migrants with no attachment to British culture, enough was enough. After almost 3 decades of rule, globalism was witnessing a judgment day, and Brexit represents a nationalistic movement that has laid in wait for 2 decades, a movement that is jumping the pond to the United States and finding a home with Donald Trump's America First campaign. But how did globalism get here? How was the vision of the international bourgeois rebuked and rejected in such a short order? The answer is not rooted in boorish patriotism. Rather, it is rooted in an understanding that global governing at the expense of national sovereignty never works. People will not die for bureaucracies, but they will die, sacrifice, and share for their country. This New World Order placed global bureaucracy over love of nation. It prioritized international cooperation at the expense of national will, and it was one in which the West, largely the United States, would use its bounty to underwrite and meddle in the affairs of the world. The idea of the EU, perhaps not surprisingly, was a CIA covert operation. Justin Raimondo wrote on May 2nd that the referendum represents the culmination of a long-term project by the United States to destroy the concept of national sovereignty in the old world and replace it with a supranational entity with ironclad links to Washington. Although many were surprised that Obama flew to the UK and openly and brazenly intervened in what was clearly a national vote, Raimondo observes that for those who understand the history of the EU, it should not be so surprising. Raimondo writes, "The European Union was born in the bosom of the Central Intelligence Agency. That's what declassified documents tell us about the origins of the European project and its progress since the Truman administration. The basic idea was to counterimpose a European identity against the internationalist ideology of the Soviets and their increasingly powerful fifth columns in the West. The European movement, which was and still is the grassroots organization that relentlessly pushed for the creation of a European superstate, was financed to the tune of $1 million a year by the American Committee for a United Europe. Money was funneled through various NGOs and foundations, including the Ford and Rockefeller Foundations." Raimondo describes how the powers orchestrating the Union wanted to keep everything, especially the creation of a monetary union, a secret, until it was inevitable. He adds, "The fact of the matter is that it is far easier for Washington to control Europe with one central authority at its reins than it is dealing with dozens of separate sovereignties. Globalism is the word for the elitist powers." This article suggests that the Brexit vote signals the end of the cabal's version of a new world order. Recall in my final words last week that I said this freedom was an illusion, that one cannot do anything without the permission of the governing power, and in this case, it is the unelected people at the top of the European Parliament, the European Council, and the European Central Bank. The plan was always to get ultimate control of the EU. First, the people would be offered incentives, such as the benefits of a Schengen agreement, allowing people to believe that the Union was good because people would be able to travel visa-free around Europe. As people become more addicted to this benefit, then smaller things would begin to happen, to begin creating disharmony and even fear, to begin justifying a need for greater protection, and also a need for taking away certain rights and freedoms, so that the protection could be delivered in a way that the governing people could dictate. The London Telegraph has been trying to inform its readerships of this fact for some time. One article from November of 2015 by Professor Alan Sked looks at some of the historical misinterpretations made by British people regarding the creation of the European Union and Britain's membership within it. According to Sked, most students seem to think that Britain was in dire economic straits, and that the European Economic Community, as it was called then, provided an economic engine which could revitalize the British economy. Others seemed to believe that after the Second World War, Britain needed to recast her geopolitical position away from empire and towards a more realistic one at the heart of Europe. Neither of these arguments, Sked says, make any sense at all. Before the EU became the entity we know today, there was the European Economic Community, the entity that created the illusion of better trading and economic conditions for all the members. Britain entered the EEC in 1973, at a time when its economy was at record levels compared to today. It was at roughly the same time Canada's economy was also riding a peak of strength. However, by 1974, Britain joined the EEC, and Canada had sold out its central bank to the Rothschilds' central banking machine. Both countries and their economies began a dramatic downward spiral into a world of debt and money created out of thin air. One of the reasons for the EEC was to partner with the US and to counter a growing French-German alliance based on French and German nationalism. Ambrose Evans Pritchard went a bit further in his article from last April. He writes that Brexiteers should have been prepared for the shattering intervention of the US. The European Union always was an American project. It was Washington that drove European integration in the late 1940s and funded it covertly under the Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon administrations. It became a complicated procedure of uniting France and Germany and then bringing them into an economic alliance that would strengthen their bond while allowing a more united Europe to stand against the Soviet threat that the US was selling to the world to justify military spending and interventions. Pritchard continues, one memorandum, dated July 26, 1950, reveals a campaign to promote a full-fledged European Parliament. It is signed by General William J. Donovan, head of the American Wartime Office of Strategic Services, which was the precursor of the Central Intelligence Agency. The key CIA front was the American Committee for a United Europe, chaired by Donovan. Another document shows that it provided 53.5% of the European movement's funds in 1958. Both articles offer some insightful information for those who are drawn to the historical background of how Europe started down the path to the point where Europe finds itself today. As Pritchard noted in the title of his article, the European Union always was a CIA project, as Brexiteers discover. In a recent interview with Infowars.com, David Icke had the following to say.
So we've had this situation in the Middle East where we've had all this bombing and destruction and chaos and catastrophe externally created by the United States, NATO, Britain. And this has forced large numbers of people to leave. And this wave into Europe has of genuine people who deserve our help because of the situation that the West has put them in, has been joined by vast numbers of other people who are not refugees but are seeking to get into Europe. And it's being allowed to happen for this reason. And it's been long planned for this reason. They want a world government, a world central bank, world army, and world currency, etc. And under the world government, they want these super states. They want the European Union, of course, the American Union, the Pacific Union, all these super states under the world government. And these super states are designed not to be countries any longer, but to be broken up into regions, subordinate regions that are easy to control. You've talked about this in relation to the United States and North America, and it's planned for the world. Now, the biggest resistance to the breakup and ending of sovereignty is a sense of national identity, a sense of distinct culture. And what is happening, and it's been happening for a long time, I mean, that's just before I mention this, it came out a few years ago that during the Blair administration, came out in documents and insiders speaking out, that they had set out to allow unfettered immigration into Britain, not to help the immigrants. They were pawns in the game, they didn't realise it, but to, quote, change the face of British society to a point where it would never go back to what it was before.
What has started out as an economic union with freedom of travel to win over the people, it has now moved into a corrupted political union that, in effect, has become the superstate mentioned moments ago. This superstate is governed by rules that give more power to the centralized body, meaning the people in Brussels, instead of the people themselves. As we are witnessing now with the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and the Trade-in Services Agreements, it is all about consolidating commercial rules and power, and not democratic rules and power. An article on the ronpaulinstitute.org website reposted an article from Tyler Durden, in which Durden reports that if anyone needs further confirmation that the European Union is fundamentally the most anti-democratic entity currently in existence, then the following statement by European Parliament Martin Schulz should put all confusion to rest. According to Schulz, the British have violated the rules. It is not the EU philosophy that the crowd can decide its fate. Durden closes with the following. So there's no escaping the fact that this is a class war. Whether it's globalization, immigration, inequality, poor economic growth, or a combination of all of them, it's quite clear from this and other anti-establishment movements that the status quo can't last in a democracy. Eventually, you'll have a reaction. This is one such major reaction, and given that the UK growth rate has been okay of late, it would be strange if pressure didn't continue to build elsewhere, where growth has been lower for longer. It is indeed a class war, and the European Union is not accustomed to losing. So the unelected president of the European Parliament, a body of politicians that were elected by the people, can claim the authority to state that the people who elected the politicians, over which he is the president, cannot decide their own fate because it goes against the EU philosophy. Don't hurt yourself trying to see the logic in that. There doesn't appear to be any. So here are a few things going on this week. Some sources are reporting that more and more countries are beginning to line up to make demands that their country now be given the chance to have a referendum on whether or not to stay in the EU. Zero Hedge was reporting on June 26th that as many as 8 countries had begun showing signs of wanting to exit from the Union, although other sources are saying the number could go much higher. An Information Clearinghouse article reposted by Finian Cunningham writes that Britain's stunning referendum vote to leave the EU has thrown a cat among the pigeons, not least in Washington, where it is feared that the Brexit could scupper or cancel its anti-Russian policy. Nearly 7 decades of American transatlantic domination are at the risk of crumbling. The unscheduled hasty visit by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry to Brussels, followed by London on Monday, is a sure sign that Washington is alarmed at the historic decision by the British electorate to quit the EU after 43 years of being in the bloc. Here are a few other key comments made by Cunningham. More to the point, Washington's perplexity is specific and self-serving. In particular, the loss of British influence inside the EU will impact on Washington's carefully constructed policy of trying to isolate Russia. Former U.S. Ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, gave full expression to these fears in an opinion piece in the Washington Post on the weekend. McFaul was quoted as saying, "Europe is now weakening, as Russia, its allies, and its multilateral organizations are consolidating, even adding new members. Putin, of course, did not cause the Brexit vote, but he and his foreign policy objectives stand to gain enormously from it." With regard to Russia, this means that the EU's economic sanctions against Moscow and the buildup of NATO military forces are put into serious doubt. Both aspects have been led by Washington, with Britain as a strident advocate of sanctions and NATO militarism. Now that London does not have a vote in Brussels, America's policy of hostility towards Russia is blunted. Cunningham also adds the following. The New York Times reports American officials are struggling to reimagine their strategy after Britain's decision to divorce the European Union, and they say the most urgent challenge will be to find a way to replace their most reliable, sympathetic partner in the hallways of European capitals, a task that will not be easy. Today, the 28-member EU bloc is barely distinguishable from the 28-member NATO military alliance in terms of adopting US-led policies, and in particular, its anti-Russia policy. The renewal of European economic sanctions against Moscow has only served to inflict huge damage on EU nations. It is self-defeating and absurdly based on scant evidence of quote-unquote Russian aggression. But the policy prevails in large part due to Washington's and Britain's NATO-ization of the EU. Vincent Browne, writing for The Journal in Ireland, reported the following on June 28th. The European Union, its elites, its hyperfans had this coming to them. They deliberately devised a supposedly idealistic project of a united Europe founded on the subversion of democracy across the continent, the exclusion of the meddlesome masses on an agenda that inevitably was going to deepen inequality. Calls are now being made for the resignation of Jean-Claude Juncker, President of the European Commission, and strangely enough, one source included in these calls is Poland. CVN reported last week a growing rift between Poland and the EU, and this may be why NATO is having its upcoming summit in July in the Polish capital, Warsaw. Zoe O'Brien, writing for the London Express on June 28th, reported that after Britain's shock vote to quit the EU, remaining countries are looking for better deals for themselves and ordering the Union to learn from its mistake or face further calls for a total breakup. Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, and the Czech Republic called on Tuesday for the powers of the European Commission to be curbed, with Warsaw calling for the dismissal of Mr. Juncker, the executive's head. Last week's referendum alarmed governments in the former communist eastern region of the EU, who had seen London as their main Eurosceptic ally in efforts to reduce centralized control from Brussels. Poland's Foreign Minister Witold Wojciechowski said, "We are asking if this leadership of the European Commission has a right to continue functioning and fixing Europe. The resistance of Poland to the growing EU hegemony is very likely why BT.com reported on June 1st that the European Union has taken a step closer towards imposing sanctions on Poland after finding its government amiss on the rule of law. That is, of course, a matter of interpretation, for we heard earlier that the EU has declared that countries and its peoples do not have the right to determine their own fates. Let's see what the coming weeks will bring. Meanwhile, in France, the French people are continuing their own version of a referendum vote, continuing their protests at massive levels, while the mainstream media continues to disregard these events and others. An article on the yournewswire.com website on June 30th reports the following. French protesters are rising up in the millions against a ruling class determined to take away their rights. There is anarchy on the streets of France as the mainstream media continues to suppress the scale of events. Thousands of masked protesters and police fought running street battles in France this week, with police using water cannon to quell rioters who hurled projectiles at them and destroyed storefronts, joining the millions of French citizens who have protested against new anti-worker laws that are designed to protect and enrich a wealthy elite at the expense of ordinary people. The protesters in Paris represent all working-class people, united, mobilized, and resisting the greed of globalist elites. Police involved are violently fighting against the people and protecting the interests of the ruling class. The article also adds that, however, as the government, police, and mainstream media continue to suppress this important movement's progress, the people continue to rise up. Western mainstream media continues to suppress information regarding the scale and intensity of the revolution taking place on French streets. While the world has been distracted by the Euro 2016 football championships in France, the elites are taking away people's rights. While the anarchy continues, it is also being reported that the government is trying to make protesting illegal, while attempting to push new laws through the parliamentary chambers. Getting an agreement on those laws may be tough, and therefore, the more powerful lower chamber will have the final say, and they could put laws into place without a vote. According to a poll, 73% of the French people would be appalled by such a move. Although the movement is centered primarily around the job market reform bill, there are much broader concerns involved, such as universal basic income, opposition to the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, amnesty for undocumented workers, solidarity with refugees, and the gender pay gap. France's mobilized collective are on a progressive mission to create another world to realize social justice and demand dignity for ordinary people. The article closes by noting the following. President Hollande and Prime Minister Manuel Valls say they will not listen to the millions of protesters or the massive majority of citizens who disapprove of the law. Since the French protests began, attempts have been made to hinder their cause. Every measure to dismiss the protesters has been attempted, everything from police tear gas to the Prime Minister Valls portraying protesters as rioters and ultra-violent youth. French Interior Minister Bernard Cazeneuve had the gall to tell protesters to find within themselves a little humanity, tolerance, and respect. While the world focuses on Brexit and to a lesser degree on the protests and riots breaking out against the elitist class, there is still another story that is being largely ignored by the mainstream media, and it is arguably the story that sits more on the minds of many in countries affected by the massive rains and floods, including France and England. It is unclear at this time whether the massive rains and floods are the result of the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, or HAARP as it is known by, or whether it is part of the Earth cleansing taking place at this time to release more energies in less destructive ways as the planet continues to shift at this time along with humanity. One article appearing on the Al Jazeera website on June 3rd noted that France, Germany, and Austria are among the key countries at risk for flooding, although I am also told that some flooding has occurred in England and Serbia, as well as Switzerland. In other financial news, as was noted at the beginning of the newscast, many news sources were screaming headlines of banking collapses, currency collapses, and markets collapsing. But here we are, 1 week after Brexit, and things have returned, perhaps unfortunately, to normal, whatever that means anymore. Many years ago, a wise piece of advice was given to me, and it was this: never use a windfall of money to pay off debts. So many people, when they come into an abundance of money, will often think to pay off debts, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, unless one truly understands that debt has been created out of thin air, and by putting your physical money into paying off something that has no value, one is wasting that valuable money. In a way, it is like spending money on defense, because one is hoping that by paying off debts, the bankers and the courts will not be able to come after any of them any longer. Observe the difference in strategies being played out by Russia and Asia, and those used by Western countries. The US and many Western countries, having more of a focus on military and corporate control, spend money trying to protect and preserve unlawful commercial scams and frauds upon people and countries. They spend money to defend their right to create money out of thin air, which screws the people from whom they are receiving money for those debts. Not exactly a winning formula, but it has served to control most of the populations of many countries for a very long time. Author John Perkins summarizes one of the strategies played out by Western countries to control their power. The following is an animated video, and the noises in the background are part of this video. The video can be viewed from a link in the show summary for this story.
We economic hitmen have managed to create the world's first truly global empire, and it's basically a secret empire. We do it in many ways, but principally we identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sisters. The money never actually goes to the country. It goes to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in that country that help a few very wealthy people, but don't benefit the majority of the people who are too poor to buy electricity or have cars to drive on the highways, and yet they're left holding a huge debt that they can't repay. So we go back at some point and say, you know, you can't pay your debts. Give us a pound of flesh. Sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies. Vote with us on the next critical UN vote. Allow us to build a military base in your backyard. Something along these lines. And when we fail, the jackals go in and either overthrow or assassinate these leaders. And if the jackals fail, as they did in Iraq, then we send in the military. I don't think the failure is capitalism. I think it's a specific kind of capitalism that we've developed. We've created what I consider a mutant viral form of capitalism. And this mutant form of capitalism, which I think is really a predatory form of capitalism, has created an extremely unstable, unsustainable, unjust, and very, very dangerous world. I've met a lot of terrorists. I've interviewed them for books. I've never met one who wanted to be a terrorist. They're desperate people. If we want to get rid of terrorism, we must get rid of the root causes, that cancer that is destroying our whole system. Because I think it's really important that we understand today we cannot have homeland security unless we understand that the whole planet is our homeland.
Russia and China have what might be considered a more Zen-like approach. They do not waste money on the buildup of military resources or in securing military bases around the world. It is reported that NATO has over 800 military bases worldwide, with the US controlling most, if not all of them. Russia is allegedly to have less than 20, and perhaps even closer to 10. The US builds aircraft carriers, while Russia is alleged to have only one at this time. What are Russia and China doing then? Instead of throwing good money after bad, they use the windfalls of money to build infrastructure, new industries, products, and services. Most importantly, they have been using it to buy gold, something that is now positioning the Asian countries to take the hegemonic control of the U.S. away from the power controllers. While the U.S. spends to protect its collapsing, dysfunctional, inferior, and criminally unlawful banking and commercial law paradigm, Russia, China, and the BRICS alliance of countries have been quietly building the new paradigm that will make the U.S. paradigm obsolete. This is what we are starting to witness in the world at this time, and thus why the U.S. has been so aggressive in trying to tear down Russia and keep Russia from strengthening its ties to Europe and also to Asia. An article on the geopolitics.co website on June 28th comments on this also, writing that the Khazarians are noted for assuming great financial control without really creating real tangible wealth. They rise up by bringing countries down. They dictate what their subjects think and do all year round. They dominate rather than rally all peoples together in a spirit of mutual cooperation and collective progress. They make money with the suffering of others. They are reported to have made at least $2 trillion by betting against the EU during the last Brexit referendum. These are mere crumbs when compared to what the BRICS are working on, because the cabal's ownership of the gold mines located here in Asia that they were investing early on exist only on paper. They could not relocate these gold mines, obviously, so they must go to war in order to force their will on sovereign countries. That persistently regressive behavior is now decisively being challenged by a growing number of countries joining in the more progressive economic program spanning all continents except the United States and Canada, which refused to join the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, one bank of three that are financing the revival of the ancient Silk Road. This decisive attempt to change the global trajectory away from endless wars and hunger in favor of a global massive development has already gone from the drawing board into the transformation of even the barren desert lands of Central Asia as new economic zones, railway terminals, and point of exchanges for goods and cultures. The BRICS alliance are not just constructing one railway at a time, but multiple lines simultaneously to lay the foundation for this new network. Russia, China, and the BRICS alliance do not seem to worry, nor do they spend significant effort trying to defend the accusations being made by the West. It is almost as if they are saying, actions speak louder than words, and what we're doing now will speak louder than anything the West could ever say or do. Russian President Putin and Chinese President Xi have a fairly active schedule following the recent International Economic Forum held in St. Petersburg. According to the article, Xi and Putin will leave from the Tashkent meeting for a bilateral summit in China on June 25th. Among the 30 agreements being prepared for their signatures there is an emphasis on cooperation in space technology, as well as on great cross-border transportation projects and energy. Russian Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Rogozin, in charge of the Russian military-industrial and space complex, has been in China preparing the agreements on space exploration and defense. Russia will also be signing an agreement in Vladivostok soon, which will allegedly settle historic territorial disputes between Russia and Japan, but reading between the lines, one may be able to argue that Japan may be attempting to break away from U.S. control and form a connection with the rapidly growing Asian alliance. As was reported last week on CVN, Germany's Foreign Minister Frank-Walter Steinmeier has been quoted as saying that he does not want to inflame any situation with Russia with saber-rattling or war cries. A second article on the same website from June 23rd reports on the unstoppable breakneck speed expansion of the Great Eurasian Corridor. This article was a report on the International Economic Forum mentioned moments ago. This article sums it up rather nicely in one sentence. The BRICS alliance is forcing the world away from the geopolitics of endless wars and regime change into a world of scientific progress and development. While Western media, leaders, and pundits try to tell the world that the Russian and Chinese economies are stagnant and causing problems, The more accurate reality appears to be that this is only true because Russia and China are not doing the things the West needs them to do in order for the West to maintain its hegemony. They are not playing the Western game of paying off debt and are instead building cities, transportation networks, including Hyperloop and magnetic levitation trains, while promoting science and development in ways that are better than anything the Western countries are currently doing. The Chinese news agency Xinhua Net reported on June 13th, before the Brexit vote, that Chinese President Xi Jinping met with German Chancellor Angela Merkel on Monday, hailing the China-Germany relations as very matured. Sino-German relations have entered a very matured stage of development, and pragmatic cooperation has reached a very high level after more than 40 years of joint efforts since the establishment of diplomatic relations, Xi said. During the meeting, Xi said China will support deepening cooperation between the two sides on education, visa facilitation, freedoms of the air, and traditional Chinese medicine. Merkel said Germany welcomes China's important role in international affairs and stands ready to increase communication and coordination with China over international and regional hot-spot issues. This is not getting mainstream coverage, but it does reflect that Germany is recognizing how important it will be to get involved in the Silk Road Initiative, and even though on one level certain European countries are pretending to support the US, the evidence appears to be getting stronger that it is the US, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and possibly Canada as well that are becoming more isolated on the international stage, and not Russia. In disclosure-related news this week, it seems that a bombshell may have just been leaked from within the European Parliament, of all places. The President of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, an unelected official who has been one of the key figures attempting to implement the agenda of the EU power brokers and controllers, rose to speak at the Parliament right after the Brexit vote. He was speaking in French, and for the French-speaking listeners, you will no doubt hear what he said immediately.
C'est notre vol vers l'avenir. Les horizons nous attendent et nous volons vers les horizons qui sont ceux de l'Europe et de la planète entière. Il faut savoir que ceux qui nous observent de loin sont inquiets. J'ai vu et entendu et écouté plusieurs des dirigeants d'autres planètes qui sont très inquiets parce qu'ils s'interrogent sur la voie que l'Union européenne va poursuivre. Et donc, il faut rassurer et les Européens et ceux qui nous observent de plus loin.
The translation I have so far of what he has said was this: You should know that those who are watching us from afar are concerned. I have seen and heard and listened to several of the leaders of other planets, and they are very, very worried, because they are questioning whether European law will continue. Therefore, it is necessary to reassure Europeans that we are being observed from afar. Whether or not this was an intentional statement or a careless statement made without thinking of where he was speaking is unclear, although the signs seem to suggest that he made the comments very clearly and with intent, as it was more than merely one or two words, but rather a few complete sentences. The other more important question, however, is related to which specific members of our galactic families to whom he is referring. Was he referring to the positive members of our galactic families who are concerned about what the cabal is doing, or is he saying that the negative members of our galactic families who have been collaborating with cabal families on Earth are concerned because they are losing power? An argument could be made either way, to be honest. As much as I would like to believe that Juncker has been read the Riot Act and given an ultimatum by the positive ETs and is choosing to change his ways, his actions and his words do not seem to support this. Juncker suggests that this leadership is questioning whether European law will continue. Assuming this part of the translation is correct, it is hard to imagine the positive galactic families supporting European law in its current form. And this leads me to believe that Juncker is referring to the galactic family members that have been helping with the enslavement of humanity and not with the freedom of humanity and our planet. Unless Juncker has been cleverly playing the role of a double agent, it would seem that he is speaking of the negative ETs as being the leadership of planets who are unhappy that the cabal agenda for control and the fact that it is no longer working. At the moment the comments were made, it appears that no politicians were surprised that he spoke of leadership from other planets. And this seems to suggest that many, if not all of them, are aware of the disclosure issue very intimately. I am open to being wrong about Juncker on this, and perhaps I should hope that I am, but so far the signs do not yet seem to support this. This is potentially huge because it was a statement made in a public forum with politicians present, including Nigel Farage, I might add. This would now open the door for anyone who ever gets a chance to interview Farage or any EU politician to ask them about the comments made by Juncker and to have them explained. It will be really interesting to see what happens when these comments start circulating through the alternative media and whether or not they will make it to certain media websites that have given attention to stories of this nature in the past. This could be the EU's attempt to follow up on the disclosure comments coming out of the Hillary Clinton campaign in the US, as though some kind of race is starting to see who gets the honor of the biggest disclosure announcement. If it is becoming a race, let's just get on with it, shall we? In another rather significant disclosure-related event this week, one of the presenters from last week's disclosure hearing that took place in Canada has openly dared U.S. officials to charge him for releasing the information he released. The following information was released by Canadian UFO disclosure advocate Victor Vigiani.
I have here in front of me 11 documents. I call them the Runnock files, and they are directly from NORAD, indicating that over the last 5 years, an average of 1,800 tracks of interest with 75 intercepts. This is directly from the commander in NORAD, with 75 intercepts. I have the documents here. I also have documents relating to UFOs that have been found by the RCMP. I also have an air traffic control report that references Mr. Hellier's indication that 2 CF-18s chased 3 UFOs in 2001 out of Comox Air Force Base at 35,000 feet and gained contact with these UFOs at 35,000 feet with no gun camera information. I also have Intelligence Committee reports from the Joint Intelligence Committee here in Canada stating that what we need to do is go in a parallel system with the United States Air Force and play down UFOs at all costs. And I have those 11 documents here. And I might add that in reference to the NORAD document, I have been threatened with indictment if I release this file. And I have it here and I'm making it public. And it talks about any distribution of this kind of information threatens national security, and in addition to the Espionage Act of the United States. I'm hereby releasing it to you. I have 11 copies here. And I dare the United States government to charge me.
The bold declaration by Vigiani was enough to get the attention of the London Express, and therefore gain at least a little bit more exposure on a subject that is being recognized as increasingly more important in the establishment of global peace. Also speaking at the hearing was Stephen Bassett of the Paradigm Research Group, and this is what he had to say relative to Canada's role in the disclosure movement.
Yes, there are countries in the world today in serious trouble, other countries. But those countries do not control 45% of the world's nuclear weapons. And Canada is not tied to these other countries as it is to the United States. The Canadian ship of state is in anchor with the U.S. ship of state connected by titanium chain. If America sinks, Canada sinks. There's an inevitable outcome to the path the U.S. has taken since 1964, and it is not good. Is there anything within the power of any person or any country that could redirect this path? Yes. Disclosure, the formal acknowledgement of the extraterrestrial presence by heads of state of nations. What can Canada do? Much. But today, let's just focus on the journalists. Canadian journalists can ask their new dynamic Prime Minister if he has been briefed on the extraterrestrial issue by his military and intelligence services, and if he has not, why not? They can ask the heads of Canadian military intelligence services if they have briefed the Prime Minister on the issue, and if not, why not? They can ask the Prime Minister and the members of the Canadian Parliament if they are aware of the public statements by Secretary Hillary Clinton and her campaign chairman John Podesta regarding the ET issue. Are they aware of the worldwide press coverage of these comments? They can ask past political leaders of Canada and former publishers and editors if they have willfully participated in a truth embargo regarding the ET presence. There are 1,000 questions they could ask. They can call for hearings in the Parliament on the ET issue. Hundreds of witnesses would be willing to testify under oath. They can dig deep into the Clinton ET Rockefeller Initiative connection. There are 26 living principals to that initiative who have not been interviewed by the mainstream media, even though the Rockefeller Initiative has been in the public domain, thanks to Grant Cameron, for 16 years. But that's an American story, isn't it? No, it's not. Do you think the extraterrestrial presence is here solely to deal with the United States? It is global. It is transcendent. And it is the most important issue in the world today. Canada is part of that world, and its citizens have a right to know. There is no arrangement Canada might have with the United States that can now justify denying the Canadian people the truth.
Bassett has also recently released a webpage that brings together all of the UFO and disclosure-related comments that have been made by the Hillary Clinton campaign and others. The chronology of comments begin as far back as 1997 and progress forward to present day. Bassett has also noted NBC News as finally having given attention to the citizen hearing event in the U.S. only 19 months after the event occurred. Canadian researcher Grant Cameron, another participant in the Canadian hearing, has released a new book called The Clinton UFO Storybook, E.T. Politics in the White House. The book covers the Rockefeller Initiative from 1993 to 1996 and, synchronistically, is coming out while Clinton herself is campaigning to be president. British UFO advocate Nick Pope, also one of the speakers at the Canadian hearing, is currently at another event in Roswell seeking to revisit the information and events that arguably started the interest in UFOs or unidentified aerial phenomenon, UAPs, as they are now being called. The Roswell Daily Record is reporting that the weekend event has drawn its own impressive list of speakers who will be commenting on various issues relating to the topic. Over to science and tech-related news now, and it is getting more and more exciting to see the kind of advancements that are coming out related to science and technology, despite the false flag news from around the world seeking to distract people from all that is going on. What is also exciting is that at least some, and perhaps even many, of these new technology releases are being released in a crowd-sourced format, meaning that anyone can use the information and can also add to it, and it is being made available to the world free of charge to help accelerate people's independence from cabal-controlled products and services. CVN has covered to a fair extent the evolution of the 3D printer, and more advancements just keep on coming. An article by William Herkowitz appearing on the Popular Mechanics website from mid-March noted the increasing use of 3D printing technology relating to chemistry. The article offers an example of a medical researcher who may be looking for a substance known for healing. For example, rhatinine, which comes from a little-known Peruvian flower, but can't get any because it is hard to come by and no one sells it. Martin Burke of the University of Illinois may, however, be able to offer a solution. The article writes that in a new study published in the journal Science today, Burke has announced the specs of a chemistry's own version of the 3D printer, a machine that can systematically synthesize thousands of different molecules, including the radinein molecular family, from a handful of starting chemicals. Such a machine could not only make radinein step by step, but could also custom create a dozen other closely related chemicals, some never even synthesized before by humans. That could allow scientists to test the medicinal properties of a whole molecular family. According to Burke, there are many molecules in nature with some extraordinary natural properties that are incredibly hard to make and just aren't available to be purchased in a lab supply catalog. The general assumption has long been that you need a custom strategy to build each molecule, especially if you're trying to automate the process. But we've demonstrated you can use the same system to create radically different molecules. You just need to modulate a step-by-step process. The process is capable of simplifying the complex process, synthesizing chemicals into a more general step-by-step process. The article continues, whether you're trying to form a ring of carbon atoms or strip away hydrogen atoms, each step requires a dose of starting chemicals, which Burke separates into distinct building blocks. Think of them as simple groups of chemical compounds like O2 or CO2, oxygen and carbon dioxide, that snap together. To perform each step, the machine connects a building block and then induces a chemical reaction and washes away the reaction's byproducts, slowly building each molecule from the ground up. The building blocks are snapped together like Lego, allowing the chemicals to mix and a reaction to take place. Using this process, Burke showed that his machine could manufacture thousands of different chemicals in 14 distinct classes of small molecules, including known medicines to several molecules used in LEDs and solar cells. The amount of time each molecule's synthesis requires is a matter of hours, depending on how many steps are involved. To put this into a language that may help people better understand the significance of this, what this technology means is that a potential technology is now arriving that may soon allow one to fabricate one's own cannabis oil, for example, instead of having to go through the process of growing one's own supply or paying for it from other suppliers. It was back in 2013 that an article appearing on the NASA website announced that NASA was working with a Texas company to create a 3D printer capable of printing food on board the International Space Station. In the 3 years since that article, the technology has very likely been improved dramatically, and now this chemical 3D printer might even be an evolutionary leap to the 3D food printer as we move ever more quickly towards a world of replicator devices, such as those in the later Star Trek series and movies. Another technology to pay close attention to is the development of artificial intelligence, or AI, that is now being used to create humanoid robots capable of helping around the house or performing specific needs or services to companies and individuals requiring assistance. Several companies are moving rapidly forward with this technology, and in the show summary for this story, I'll include a link to a video that offers an insight about what this technology could mean and how it could potentially impact not only us as humans, but perhaps also the sentience of an artificial intelligence. As individuals continue their process of awakening and using their skills more for the benefits of humanity and the planet, instead of only for personal gain, really creative people are using their knowledge and their skills to create some pretty amazing things. The vast majority of you have, no doubt, at some time or another, received a parking ticket. And even though you may know that the legal system is a criminal farce of commercial rules given the force of law, you may not have the time to research and fight the ticket. One might consider, at least in North America, to go to a company, usually consisting of retired police officers, who are willing to hire themselves out to help people fight their traffic violations. Even with that hypocrisy, people feel frustrated that they are still having to pay a fee to someone who used to help generate revenue for the police department through the issuance of tickets. In essence, it is a state-sponsored commercial racketeering scam. An article on the BT.com website by Hannah Buckley on June 29th offers that hope may be on the way, at least for people in the UK and the US initially. Buckley writes, "A website which provides people with a quick and easy way to fight parking tickets and possibly appeal for compensation for delayed flights has helped users save around £3 million in just 5 months. The website Do Not Pay, which has also been called Lawyer Robot, provides the consultancy and letter writing services of a lawyer for free. By entering details of your complaint, you can find out if you've got grounds for an appeal. Do Not Pay was designed by Joshua Broder, a student at Stanford University in California. When he turned 18 and started driving, he received some parking tickets he felt were issued unfairly, so he appealed to local councils. Noting that the appeals process was similar across most councils, he created a program to help people generate legally sound documents, simply by answering a few questions. Broder explains, "I noticed that there was a formulaic way of writing the appeals, and using my coding skills, I thought that would be great to help a few friends appeal their tickets automatically using a website." The website uses technology called a chat bot, allowing the program to ask the user a series of questions, just like a human. Broder continues, explaining that once it knows the issue, it will ask a few questions and place all the information it requires into a legally sound document which can be sent directly to local councils, airlines, or banks, depending on what type of appeal is being generated. Amazingly, it only took Broder 3 weeks to produce and launch it, although originally the site was only for family and friends, back in September of 2015. The article contains updated information that, as of June 2016, the website Do Not Pay has now successfully challenged 160,000 out of 250,000 tickets. Libby Plummer, writing for the London Mirror on June 28th, added that after launching successfully in London and New York, the service is due to land in Seattle next. While the system has so far only been used to contest parking fines, Broder hopes to adapt it in the future for a number of altruistic uses. This is perhaps where the value of crowdsourcing the program may help to expand the service as quickly as possible for the benefit of as many people as possible. One reason for why some of the cases are not successful may be due to some local commercial rules that have not yet been factored into the current program. However, as more innovative people begin generating their own ideas from initiatives such as this and making their product available for free, they may themselves start getting the recognition that the universe often tends to bring to people who place service to humanity and the planet ahead of personal or commercial gain. This is how the world will continue to change as we all work and share together our best practices of how to take on the many different cabal-controlled structures and begin to beat them at their game. The website Do Not Pay will appear in the show summary for those curious to learn more. In this week's final words. Last week, I offered some insights on the illusion and delusion of democracy. It seems that there were a number of people who resonated with the message I shared. Of course, there will be many who will not resonate with it, and this is the divine perfection of the duality within which we all chose to incarnate for the purposes of experiencing this illusion, while also trying to remember who we are and the all that is, from which we are a part, but have forgotten. As many, including myself, have long been waiting, there are now changes on a global scale beginning to show up in full view of the public. Although it is becoming increasingly more able to see these events playing out in a public way, there is also the disinformation campaigns and agenda that are being played out alongside to further delay humanity's awakening and the shifts in human and planetary consciousness. I would like to reflect this week on an article that has appeared on the Times website from June 18th. The title of the article is The Problem with Seeing Only What We Want to See. Humanity has a long history with this issue, and it has been a part of the human journey that each human would begin to awaken and to see things from his or her uniquely different, yet equally beautiful perspective, while trying to merge that perspective with something even bigger that the same individual may not yet have any information about or any connection to. This requires even those of us who claim to be awake to acknowledge that there are still many, many more layers to reality that even the so-called awakened ones have no understanding. One who just happens to be more aware than another may jump to a conclusion that she or he is in possession of truth. Over the decades, religions have attempted to market truth to humans. Politicians have attempted to market democracy to humans. Judges, lawyers, bankers, media, and teachers, and more have attempted to market truth to humans worldwide. Those who are experiencing a little more awareness begin to see that truth is very relative and very subjective to the individual perceiving it and experiencing it. This article, written by Marcia Sirota, describes how she has clients who come to her for sessions but rarely notice a particular painting in the room that is designed to get attention, but rarely does. She describes examples of people reading sentences full of mistakes, but the brain doesn't auto-correct, and we often miss these obvious mistakes. A husband may miss all the signs that his wife or partner is unhappy until he or she finally separates, and then he is faced with all that was in front of him previously. A woman may ignore signs of a bad temper in a partner until she or he finally hits her, and, although shocked, may not be surprised when the signs are finally noticed. We may overlook little pains in our bodies until they become serious enough to require a hospital visit. People may turn a blind eye to sexual abuse for fear of not wanting to acknowledge what may be going on. In fatal cases, some may let an ex-partner into their home, knowing full well that the partner may be prone to violence, and the person may get killed in the process. Of course, these are events happening at the physical 3D reality of which we are mostly aware. At this time, most people are still not ready to grasp the higher soul contract agreements that souls make to carry out certain acts that cause great pain, harm, and even death. Sirota writes, human nature is fascinating. Whether it's worded on a page, pictures on a wall, or evil in our midst, too often we choose to see not what's right there, but what we hope or expect to see. Often, the warning signs of trouble are all around us, there to help us if only we'd choose to notice them. On many occasions in history, citizens didn't want to see that their leaders were corrupt or misguided and ended up experiencing horrors because of their denial. Today, too many people convince themselves that climate change doesn't exist because they don't want to face the possibility of a coming environmental disaster that could have a catastrophic impact on human life. There's always a conflict within us over the warning signs of trouble bombarding our attention and what we'd rather see. We're intelligent, and yet so often our choices are driven by how we think things ought to be and not to the truth that's staring us in the face. Let's explore this on a level that is as simple as a media newscast. People watch the news, and on some level they want to believe in the inherent goodness of people and the inherent truth of journalists. They will defend their media, their country, and their democracy until a day comes when that truth, for them, is no longer true. They may move into another space of awareness, joining others who think like them, and they carry on the torch of informing those around them about what truth now means to them. Others who were more aware will continue their journey to become increasingly more aware, as this is what life is all about, the journey towards becoming ever more aware of oneself. These individuals will move into a different space of awareness, and for them, truth will also take on a new meaning. Each will continue to see what they want to see, as long as it supports the space of awareness that one is currently within, until one is no longer within it. My news program, as I have told listeners on many occasions, is not on reporting truth. It is reporting on perspectives of information that rely on each individual to take from the newscast what one feels is truth for oneself in that one moment of now. Maybe what makes CVN unique is the fact that I am able to admit that CVN is not truth, but rather a tool of information that allows one to take as much as one is ready to take and use it in service to oneself for however long it is meaningful to do so. Sirota continues, we look at people and see the qualities we hope to see in them, not the actual character traits they're exhibiting, and then we suffer the consequences of our willful blindness. The same could be said for any media newscast, any religion, any national identity or belief, or any commercial product or service we buy. It can even be applied to so-called spiritual gurus. Sirota closes with the following. Initially, it seems so much easier to see what we prefer to see, rather than face the unpleasant truth of what's actually there. Still, what I've realized is that no matter how difficult it is to acknowledge the warning signs of trouble in our relationships or environment, it's always better to do so. There's an old proverb that goes, there are none so blind as those who will not see. Fortunately, it's not inevitable that we stay blind. We can start paying attention to all the subtle and obvious signals bombarding our attention every day. We can choose to start seeing what's in front of us and gain a significant advantage over those who continue not to see. It can be uncomfortable, even painful, to see what's really there, but as they say, the truth shall set you free. I'd add that facing the truth will set you apart from the average person in how much pain you can avoid down the road, and ultimately in how successful you can be. Create a wonderful week until our next moment of now. So, that is a sample of the unfolding higher consciousness news around the world this week. Cosmic Vision News is broadcast weekly from the CosmicVisionNews.com website. Links to stories used in this broadcast are published in the show summary, which is also available on the website. CVN can be followed through its Facebook page, YouTube channel, as well as on Twitter, Google+, and LinkedIn. Thank you for sharing your time with me. I'm Jeffrey West, reminding you that most people don't really want the truth. They just want a constant reassurance that what they happen to believe is the truth. Until our next moment of now, stay grounded in love, hold the vision of light and peace in your hearts, and keep your eyes to the skies. Disclosure is unfolding all around you. Namaste.